I'm a huge fan of early John Carpenter films, Assault on Precinct 13, Halloween, The Fog, and the kind of scores that those movies had. They were very aggressive, intense, electro-based scores. You know, they weren't traditional orchestral scores in any way. And what we wanted was something like that. Kind of like early Carpenter, but for the 21st century. We definitely needed something very different to the usual just straight composer route. And that's why, you know, we came up with the idea of pairing Marco and Manson, because, you know, I felt they'd be very, very complementary if we could actually pull it off. And when we talked about it, everyone said, you're insane, it'll never work, you know, you'll never be able to get them. But, you know, I was a huge fan of Marco's because of the Scream movies and Mimic as well, which is a fantastic score.
So I'm scared to death of horror movies. I think the first horror movie I've seen was Scream. But the thing it does lend itself to, scary movies and horror movies, it does lend itself really well to exploring different timbres, orchestral timbres, and 20th century music techniques, which, you know, I'm a big fan of. I think that's why this is sort of a genre thing that has worked out.
Well, whenever I write music for my own albums, I've always got some sort of image or scene, or I'm often kind of making a concept of a record to begin with. So it was always a dream of mine to be able to compose music to an image, because I don't feel you can have one without the other. So I wanted to take what I do in rock music and translate that into scoring without writing rock songs. And I wanted to try and make this very much unlike my music that I normally do with my band, but still make it exciting.
Referendum to the hive.
So there is a lot of heavy guitar elements to it, but there's also a lot of very melodic and very specific sound textures that try and enhance the scene. There were three elements that I noticed right off the bat from the film that I wanted to incorporate into everything I did. One was a bit of childishness related to Alice in Wonderland because of the Red Queen. One was a very extreme coldness and the biological feel. And the other one was a bit of a fascist military element with the commandos. I did create a theme for the Red Queen. So when they first introduce her, there's a very childish waltzing melody.
Get out, you can't be in here.
Don't listen to anything she says. She's a holographic representation of the Red Queen.
You have to get out.
Modeled after the head programmer's daughter.
And then when she comes back later and starts telling them that they're basically fucked and here's why, it returns in a different, more menacing shape.
The T-virus provides a massive jolt both to cellular growth and to those trace electrical impulses. But quite simply, it reanimates the body.
And I'm a huge fan of children's music, and my inspiration for the main theme melody was based very much on just imagining sort of Alice in Wonderland inserted into this just terrible world of decay and biological warfare.
It's a very modern feeling film. It's cut in a very extreme way and it's lit in a very extreme way. And for me, I mean, the best way I can describe it is very modern. It's very glacial. And it needed a kind of modern sound to go with it.
I think the action scenes are probably the ones that are the most exciting. That very electronic, very rigid metal guitars that couldn't possibly be played by a rock and roll band. It's completely electronic, completely cold and emotionless and just violent.
because it's electronic, it gives the kind of grind and the relentlessness of what the zombies are. You know, they just keep coming and coming and coming. And this music just keeps going and going and going, and it doesn't change.
From the first time I went over to his studio and saw it, what he was doing, the sounds that he was creating, I knew that he was approaching it from a scoring point of view rather than from a song point of view.
I noticed when I would, go to his studio that he, writes out the sheet music traditionally. Mine are sort of like drawings and more descriptions and shapes, and the notes are written down, D, E, F, and R. I'll sometimes making my own notes, but I don't use the traditional way of doing that because I was never schooled to do that.
Traditionally, I approach a film more from a melodic standpoint first and think of thematic material that'll go with it. When I went to Manson's, he was working on thematic material too, but stuff was textually based and sonically based.
When we first started working with Manson, it was almost like working with a sound designer rather than a composer, because the first thing he played me was like 10 noises, almost like a really fucked up ticking clock, and just strange sounds, and I go, I like that, I like that, I don't like that. And then he would go off and work those textural details into an actual track.
I didn't understand that the composer or person responsible for the music wasn't, I guess, not allowed or not supposed to also create other sounds or ambiences or things like that, because I felt like, just from my background and how I make music, that's a very important part of the piece. Lynch is a good example of his films and the drones and things like that he uses quite often in Elephant Man or Blue Velvet and things like that. Very, very essential to a movie and very essential to the way I work.
For instance, if like Mila's walking down an empty hallway, you want to play the ambience of that it is what it is and that it's scary, and just, it could either be a sound effect type of thing, or it could be a musical thing that borders on a sonic representation of that.
I feel like I've been able to, over the years, accomplish and have a knack for figuring out what notes and what melodies create what sort of moods. And I'm a big fan of also what frequencies do to people, much like when a dog hears a high frequency that we don't hear.
Our editor, Alex, has this really cute miniature poodle, and this poodle just sits at his feet, like totally devoted. Like we're working really long hours, like 16 hours a day, just sits there. Calm, quiet, loving poodle. Sometimes it sits at his feet and just stares up at him like that. And then one day, this dog went berserk. He's like running around, barking, trying to get out the window. And we're like looking at this, what's got into the dog? I mean, what's it eaten? And we realized we were laying Manson's music up. And there's clearly something in the music that was driving the dog completely insane. I figured it was one of the high frequency noises that he kept threatening to put in the movie to like fuck everyone up.
There are similar things that can be done to human beings as well. And sometimes people won't know why they feel the way they do when they hear my stuff. And if it gives them some sort of intestinal problems, that could be my fault as well.
It's turned out much better than I ever thought it was going to be. And I think what's really original about it is that it feels like source music. It feels like music we've taken off people's albums, but it fits perfectly with the picture. So it kind of works like score, but it feels like source. So we started calling it scorce music.
I enjoyed scoring so much that it probably frightens my band, because it's something that came much more naturally to me, even though I'm not a classically trained musician. I approach it in a childish way and just do things by what feels and sounds right. And if it scares me or makes me feel a certain way, then I know that it's working right.